Montana Territory, autumn of 1889. The child arrived in October with the first frost, and by November the whole town knew she had no father's name written in the church ledger. Violet Brennan stood at the window of her rented room above the Silver Dollar Saloon, watching decent women cross the street rather than walk past her shadow. What she didn't know was that Salvation wore a leather apron and carried the smell of coal smoke in its beard. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning it all came apart started with perfect silence. Violet woke before dawn in the narrow room above the saloon, her daughter Anna sleeping in the wooden crate she'd lined with feed sacks and an old quilt. 3 months old now, dark hair, serious eyes, fingers that gripped like they already understood the world, demanded holding on. The child never cried much, as if she sensed noise was a luxury they couldn't afford. Violet rose carefully, her body still aching in places that hadn't healed right. No doctor had come when Anna was born. Delilah, the other girl who worked downstairs, had helped as best she could with hot water and torn sheets and prayers muttered in Spanish. But Delilah was gone now, moved on to Butte with a mining foreman who promised her a house with real windows. Just as well, fewer witnesses to what came next. She dressed in the half-light, pulling on the blue cotton dress she wore during the day, the one that buttoned high at the neck and made her look almost respectable if you didn't know where she slept. Her hair pinned up severe and plain, the rouge and kohl stayed in their tin on the washstand. Those were for night, for downstairs, for the version of herself that earned the coins she kept in a jar under the loose floorboard. Anna stirred, made a small sound. Violet lifted her, pressed her lips to the warm crown of her head, breathed in that particular sweetness that belonged only to infants. This small weight in her arms was the only true thing she'd ever held. Everything else had been borrowed, rented, or stolen. The knock came at 7, 3 sharp raps, knuckles on pine, not the lazy bang of a drunk looking for company. This was official. Violet opened the door 6 inches. Horace Pritchard stood in the dim hallway, his wool vest buttoned tight over his belly, his mustache waxed into 2 sharp points. He didn't look at her face. He looked past her, into the room, at the crate that held the child. "Miss Brennan," he said. "Not Violet. Never her first name anymore. We need to speak." She didn't move from the doorway. "I paid rent through the month. This isn't about rent." He pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket, held it between 2 fingers like it might burn him. "Got a petition here. Signed by 14 residents of Copper Bend. Concerned citizens, they call themselves." Violet's stomach dropped, but her face stayed still. Years of smiling at men she despised had taught her that much. Concerned about what? About a child being raised in a saloon by an unwed mother with no means and no morals. He said it flat, like reading from a menu. They want the baby taken to the Sisters of Mercy in Helena. Say it's a matter of Christian decency. The hallway tilted. Violet gripped the doorframe. "She's mine. She's a bastard with no father's name in the record." Horace's voice didn't rise, didn't need to. The words themselves were weapons. Judge Farley's reviewing the petition. He's sympathetic to the ladies of the Temperance Society, and you know how Mrs. Krantz feels about this establishment. He folded the paper back into his pocket. "I'm not heartless, Miss Brennan. I'm giving you warning. 1 week, maybe 2. Then they'll come with the law behind them. I can work more hours. I can. You can't." He cut her off, not cruel but certain. "Not here. Not with a child upstairs. It's bad for business. Men don't want to hear a baby crying while they're drinking. And the decent folk, they've been looking for a reason to shut me down for years. I can't give them ammunition." He met her eyes finally, and there was something almost like pity there, but pity never paid for food. "I'm sorry. Truly." But you need to be gone before they come. Take the child and go somewhere they won't follow." "Where?" The word came out raw. "Where am I supposed to go?" He shook his head, already turning away. "That's not my trouble to solve." The door closed. His boots creaked down the stairs. Violet stood there, Anna warm against her chest, and felt the walls of the room press inward like a fist closing. She had $17 in the jar under the floorboard. She had one trunk with 2 dresses, a shawl, a pair of boots with cardboard covering the holes in the soles. She had a daughter whose birth had been recorded by the county clerk with a blank space where the father's name should have been, a blank space that branded them both, and she had nowhere to go. The day unfolded cruel and ordinary. Sun rose, frost melted off the wooden sidewalks, the town moved through its rhythms like nothing had shifted. Violet walked Anna down to the Mercantile just after noon, needing air, needing to feel like she still existed in the world beyond that small room. She kept her head down, her shawl pulled close. Mrs. Krantz stood outside the hotel talking to 2 other women in dark dresses and cameo brooches. Their conversation stopped when Violet approached. Mrs. Krantz's mouth pruned into a tight line. She stepped deliberately into Violet's path. "You've got the nerve showing your face on this street in daylight," Mrs. Krantz said, her voice carried, meant to. Other people slowed, turned to watch. "Walking around with that child like you've got a right to dignity." Violet tried to step around her. Mrs. Krantz moved again, blocking her. "Everyone knows what you are," the older woman continued. "Everyone knows that babies have sin in her very blood. You think you can just parade through town, flaunting your shame." Anna began to fuss, sensing the tension in Violet's arms. Violet rocked her gently, kept her voice low. "Excuse me. I need to pass. What you need is to give that child to people who can raise her proper, in a godly home. Not above a saloon where her mother," she stopped herself, but the rest hung in the air like smoke, "where her mother spreads her legs for money." Violet's jaw locked. She'd taken worse words than that, had learned to let them slide off like water. But with Anna in her arms, with the petition already signed and the judge already sympathetic, the words landed different. They had weight now. They had power. "She's my daughter," Violet said quietly. "She's a mistake, Mrs. Krantz replied. "And mistakes need correcting." One of the other women touched Mrs. Krantz's elbow, murmured something. They moved aside finally, but slowly, making Violet squeeze past on the narrow sidewalk. She heard their laughter behind her, polite and poisonous. At the Mercantile, Mr. Doyle sold her a pound of cornmeal and a half-pound of lard without speaking. His eyes stayed on the counter. When she reached for her coins, he pulled his hand back so their fingers wouldn't touch, like her poverty might be contagious or her choices might rub off. She walked back to the silver dollar, with Anna sleeping against her shoulder. The saloon wouldn't open for another 2 hours. The street was empty. Violet stood at the base of the stairs that led to her room and felt the future collapse into a single, impossible choice: give up her child or run with nothing and watch her starve. That evening, she didn't go downstairs when the piano started. She stayed in her room, sitting on the edge of the bed with Anna in her lap, watching the light die beyond the single window. The sounds of the saloon rose through the floorboards' laughter, the clink of glasses, boots on wood, the low rumble of men's voices. Once, that had been her world. Now it was just noise on the other side of a locked door. She thought about her mother, dead now 6 years. Thought about the farm in Ohio where she'd grown up, the way her father had turned her out when she was 16 for letting the banker's son kiss her behind the church. She'd made her way west, working as a laundress, a seamstress, a cook in a railroad camp, each job paying less and demanding more, until finally she'd ended up here, in Copper Bend, in the Silver Dollar, where at least the pay was honest about what it bought. She'd thought she was careful. She'd thought she understood how things worked. But then there was a night. and a man whose name she never learned, and a mistake that became the only thing in her life that wasn't one. Anna yawned, her small mouth opening and closing like a bird's. Violet traced the curve of her cheek with one finger. "I won't let them take you," she whispered. "I don't know how, but I won't." The child's eyes fluttered closed. She trusted completely, the way only the very young can trust. Violet envied that, even as it broke her heart. Night deepened. The saloon grew louder, then quieter, then silent. Violet lay on the bed, fully dressed, Anna beside her in the nest of quilts, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. Fear sat on her chest like a stone. Somewhere past midnight, she heard boots on the stairs, heavy, uneven, a drunk probably, stumbling to the wrong room. The steps paused outside her door. She held her breath. Then they moved on, creaking down the hall to one of the other rooms where the girls still worked. But the interruption shattered whatever fragile calm she'd managed. She rose, paced the small floor, counted her money again, even though she knew the number wouldn't change. $17, maybe enough to get to Helena. Maybe enough for a week's room and board while she looked for work. But who would hire a woman with an infant and no husband? Who would rent to her? The questions circled like vultures. By dawn, she'd made a decision. Not a good one, but the only one she could see. She'd go to Judge Farley herself. She'd beg. She'd promise anything to leave town, to find work elsewhere, to never trouble Copper Bend again. Maybe mercy existed somewhere in the man. Maybe he had daughters of his own. She dressed Anna in the cleanest clothes she had, a little gown Delilah had sewn from flour sacks and trimmed with rickrack. She washed her own face, pinned her hair, buttoned her coat. In the mirror, she looked pale and too thin, shadows like bruises under her eyes. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman with no options and no time. The courthouse sat on the far end of Main Street, a two-story brick building with white trim and an American flag hanging limp in the cold air. Violet climbed the steps with Anna bundled against her chest. Inside, the hallway smelled of tobacco and old paper. A clerk sat at a desk, scratching notes into a ledger. "I need to see Judge Farley," Violet said. The clerk looked up, took in her appearance, the baby in her arms. His expression closed. "The judge doesn't see people without appointments. It's urgent. It always is." He went back to his ledger. Violet stood there, feeling the weight of futility settle over her shoulders like snow. She could argue, could make a scene, but it would only prove what they already believed about her. That she was desperate, improper, undeserving of consideration. She turned to leave just as the inner door opened and a man stepped out, tall, silver-haired, wearing a black suit and a watch chain across his vest, Judge Farley. He glanced at her, his gaze sliding over her, and the child with practiced indifference. "Your Honor," Violet said, the words catching in her throat. "Please, just a moment." He paused, hand on the doorframe. "You're the girl from the silver dollar." "Not a question. A statement," she nodded. "Then you know why I can't speak with you." His voice wasn't unkind, but it was final. "The petition's under review. Anything you say to me now would be inappropriate. If you want to contest the matter, hire a lawyer. I can't afford. That's not my concern." He stepped back into his office. The door closed with a soft, definitive click. Violet stood in the empty hallway, Anna warm and trusting in her arms, and felt the last thread of hope snap clean. She walked out of the courthouse into the cold morning and kept walking, not back toward the saloon, but out toward the edge of town where the buildings thinned and the prairie opened like a mouth. She didn't have a plan. She just needed to move, to breathe, to escape the weight of all those watching eyes. The road curved past the livery stable and the blacksmith's forge. Smoke rose from the chimney, grey against the pale sky. She could hear the ring of hammer on an anvil, steady and sure, the sound of something being shaped into purpose. Violet stopped walking, She stood in the frozen road, Anna, sleeping against her heart, and stared at the smoke rising from the forge. She didn't know what she was looking for, didn't know what she expected to find in the rhythm of that hammer or the heat of that fire, but for the first time in days, she wasn't moving away from something. She was standing still, watching, waiting for a sign she didn't believe in but couldn't stop hoping for. The hammering stopped. The silence felt enormous. And then a figure appeared in the doorway of the forge, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, face smudged with soot. He looked out at the road, at the woman standing alone in the cold with a baby in her arms. Their eyes met across the distance, and though neither of them knew it yet, everything had just changed. The man in the doorway didn't move toward her. He just stood there, leather apron dark with ash, sleeves rolled despite the cold. His face was hard to read from this distance, all angles and shadow, beard trimmed close, eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. He raised one hand in something that wasn't quite a wave, more an acknowledgement that she existed and he'd seen her. Violet's instinct was to walk away. She'd learned young that men who noticed you always wanted something, and she had nothing left to give except the child in her arms, which was the one thing she'd die before surrendering. But her feet stayed planted in the frozen mud, maybe because she was too tired to run, maybe because something in the way he stood there, patient, unhurried, felt different from every other man in this town. He stepped out of the forge, wiping his hands on a rag tucked into his belt. He moved like someone comfortable with his own weight, no swagger or hurry. When he was close enough that she could see his face properly, she noticed the scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his hairline, pale against weather-beaten skin. His eyes were brown, darker than the mud on her boots. "You need help?" he asked. His voice was low, roughened by smoke or disuse. The question was so simple it almost broke her. "I don't know," she said, and heard how hollow the words sounded. He glanced at the baby, then back at her face. That child wrapped warm enough? Violet looked down at Anna, who'd begun to stir against the cold. She'd bundled her as best she could, but the shawl was thin and the blanket had holes. "Warm enough," she lied. The man's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Right." He turned slightly, gestured toward the forge. "Fire's hot inside. You both look half froze. Come warm up for a minute." Every warning Violet had ever learned screamed at her to refuse. Strange man, isolated building, no witnesses. But Anna whimpered, a small sound of discomfort, and Violet's fear for her daughter outweighed her fear of everything else. She followed him across the frozen yard. The interior of the forge hit her like a wall of heat. The furnace glowed orange in the corner, coals pulsing like a beating heart. Tools hung on the walls in careful rows, hammers, tongs, files, each one clean and precisely placed. The floor was swept, the workbench organized. This was a man who lived by order, she thought, who believed in things having their proper place. He pulled a three-legged stool closer to the fire, far enough back that the heat wouldn't scorch, but close enough to thaw frozen fingers. "Sit," he said. Not an order, an offer. She sat, grateful beyond words. Anna stirred more actively now, making the small grunting sounds that meant hunger was coming. Violet rocked her gently, hoping to buy a few more minutes before the child's needs became urgent and embarrassing. The man moved to a corner where a small stove sat, separate from the forge. He opened the firebox, stirred the coals inside, set a dented pot of water to heat. From a shelf he took a tin cup, rinsed it from a pitcher, and filled it with water. He handed it to her without comment. She drank. The water was cold and clean and tasted like the first mercy she'd been offered in weeks. "Thank you," she managed. He nodded, went back to his workbench. For several minutes he said nothing, just returned to whatever task. She'd interrupted something involving a piece of iron he heated in the forge and then shaped with careful, measured strikes. The hammer rang against metal in a rhythm that was almost soothing. He wasn't watching her, wasn't demanding conversation or explanation. He was just letting her sit in the warmth while he worked. Anna's whimpers grew more insistent. Violet stood, turned her back to the man, and opened her coat to nurse. She waited for him to say something, to look, to make some comment that would remind her what she was and what he probably thought of her. But he just kept working, the hammer ringing steady, giving her privacy through the simple act of attention elsewhere. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When Anna had settled and Violet had rebuttoned her coat, the man set down his hammer and turned. "I'm Thomas Garrett," he said. "I run the forge here." Violet. She didn't offer her last name. Didn't matter, he probably already knew it. Everyone in town knew the girl from the saloon. "Violet," he repeated, like testing the shape of it. "Pretty name." He moved to the small stove where the water had begun to steam. From a tin, he measured something into a second cup coffee, she realized from the smell, and poured hot water over it. He let it steep, then handed it to her. "Not fancy, but it's hot." She cupped the warm metal between her palms. "Why are you being kind to me?" Thomas considered that, his expression thoughtful. "Does there need to be a reason?" "In my experience, yes." He leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. "Fair enough. Let's say, I don't care much for how this town treats people it decides aren't worth treating well. You know who I am. What should I do? I know you're standing in my forge, half frozen with a baby who needs better than what you've got right now. Everything else is noise." Violet studied him, searching for the trap, the angle, the expectation that would come due later. But his face stayed open, patient. "They're trying to take her," she heard herself say. "There's a petition. The judge is reviewing it. They want to send her to the Sisters of Mercy in Helena." Thomas's jaw tightened. "On what grounds?" "That I'm unfit. That she deserves better than being raised in a saloon by a woman with no morals and no husband." The words tasted like ash. "And what do you want?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that. Not the judge, not Horace Pritchard, not Mrs. Krantz. They'd all told her what she should do, what was proper, what God demanded. But no one had asked what she wanted. "I want to keep my daughter," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word. "I want her to have a life, a real one." "Not what I had," Thomas nodded slowly. "Then we'll figure something out." "We?" She almost laughed. "You don't even know me. Don't need to know everything to know right from wrong." He pushed off from the workbench, moved to the window that looked out over the road. "How long before they come for her?" "A week, maybe 2. That's not much time." "No." He turned back to face her. "You got family? Somewhere you could go?" "No family, no money for travel, and even if I did, they'd find me. A woman alone with a baby, no husband, no papers, I'd stand out everywhere." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Inside, the forge fire crackled and settled. Anna slept on, warm now, fed, oblivious to the forces gathering around her small life. "What if you weren't alone?" Thomas said finally. Violet looked at him sharply. "What does that mean? What if you had a husband? Papers, respectability. A name that wasn't tied to the silver dollar." She stood, clutching Anna tighter. I don't sell myself for room and board. If that's what you're suggesting, it's not." He held up both hands, palms out. "I'm saying marry me, legal and proper. Give the child my name. Let people think she's mine. They can't take a baby from a married woman with a home and a husband who works steady." The words hung in the air like smoke. Violet stared at him, trying to understand if this was a joke, a trick, or something even stranger, an actual offer. "You're serious. I don't joke about things like this." "You don't know me," she repeated. "You don't know what I've done, where I've been. I know you're trying to protect your child. That's enough. Why would you do this? What do you get out of it? Thomas picked up the piece of iron he'd been shaping, turned it over in his hands. I'm 43 years old. Had a wife once. Died of fever 9 years back. No children. This town thinks I'm strange because I don't drink, don't gamble, keep to myself. Maybe I am strange. But I've got a house with empty rooms and a business that pays steady. I can give you what you need, a name, protection, a reason for them to leave you alone. And maybe, he paused, choosing his words, maybe it'd be good not to eat supper alone every night, to have someone to talk to hear a child's voice in the house again. Violet sank back onto the stool, her mind racing. It was insane. Marrying a stranger to save her daughter from being taken by other strangers. But insane was the only option left when all the sane paths led to the same ending. Anna, disappearing into an orphanage, Violet alone in a rented room waiting to become nothing. "What would you want from me?" she asked quietly. "What do you mean? As a wife? What would you expect?" Understanding crossed his face. "Separate rooms. Your business is your own. I'm offering a partnership, not—" He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. "I won't touch you. That's not what this is about. And if I said yes, then what? Then we go see Reverend Mitchell this afternoon, get married, quiet, just witnesses from the church. Tomorrow we file the papers with the county clerk. By the time Judge Farley looks at that petition again, you'll be Mrs. Thomas Garrett, living in a respectable house with a blacksmith husband. They'll have no grounds to take the child." It was too simple, too easy. There had to be something he wasn't saying, some piece that would snap into place later and trap her worse than before. But Anna shifted in her arms, making small, contented sounds, and Violet thought about the room above the saloon, the 14 signatures on that petition, Mrs. Krantz's face promising righteous removal. "I need to think about it," she said. "Of course." Thomas set down the iron, wiped his hands again. "But Violet, think fast. Time's not on our side here." She stood, adjusting Anna's blankets. "Where's your house?" "End of Birch Street. White clapboard, green shutters. You can't miss it. I'll come by tomorrow." "Give you my answer then," he nodded. "Fair enough." He walked her to the door, held it open against the wind. "One more thing. Whatever you decide, I meant what I said about the fire. You're welcome here any time you need to get warm. No strings, no expectations. Just warmth." Violet looked at him, this strange, solid man, who'd offered her the impossible without asking for her story or her shame. "Why?" she asked one more time. Thomas glanced at the baby in her arms, then met Violet's eyes. "Because everybody deserves someone standing in their corner when the world decides they don't matter. And right now, you two need someone willing to stand." She didn't have words for what that meant, so she just nodded and stepped out into the cold. The walk back to the Silver Dollar felt different than the walk away from it. The town hadn't changed, same buildings, same people crossing the street to avoid her, same weight of judgment pressing down from every window. But something inside her had shifted, like a lock tumbling open after years of being stuck. She had an option now. Not a good one, maybe, but an option that wasn't surrender. That night, after the saloon closed and the last drunk stumbled out into the darkness, Violet sat by the window, with Anna sleeping beside her. She watched the stars wheel overhead and thought about Thomas Garrett's scarred face, his careful hands, the way he'd given her privacy while she nursed without making it a gift she'd have to repay. She thought about his house at the end of Birch Street, the empty rooms he'd mentioned, the suppers eaten alone. She thought about the petition sitting on Judge Farley's desk, the countdown of days until they came for her daughter, the iron certainty that she couldn't fight them alone. And she thought about the word Thomas had used, partnership. Not ownership, not transaction, partnership. like they might build something together instead of him just taking what she owed. By morning, she'd made her decision, not because she believed in fairy tales or rescue or the kindness of strangers, but because when you're drowning, you don't ask questions about the rope someone throws you. You grab hold and pray it's strong enough to pull you up. She dressed carefully in her one good dress, grey wool, patched at the elbows but clean. She braided her hair, pinned it in a crown around her head, the way her mother had taught her before everything went wrong. She wrapped Anna in every scrap of warm cloth she owned and walked through the morning cold to the end of Birch Street. The house was exactly as he'd described. White clapboard, green shutters, a chimney trailing smoke into the pale sky. Neat yard, stacked firewood, a garden plot turned and ready for spring. It looked like the kind of place where nothing bad could touch you, though Violet knew better than to believe that. Bad found you anywhere if it wanted to. She knocked. The door opened almost immediately, like he'd been waiting. Thomas wore clean clothes, his beard trimmed fresh, hair combed back. He looked nervous, she realized. Actually nervous. It made him seem more human, less like the solid, unshakable figure from the forge. "I have my answer," Violet said. He waited, hands still on the doorframe. "Yes," she said. "If you meant it, if this is real, then yes." Thomas let out a breath, and something that might have been relief crossed his face. "I meant it. Every word." He stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in. Let me show you the house. Let me show you what I'm offering before we make it official." Violet stepped across the threshold, Anna warm against her heart, and felt the future split open into something she couldn't predict. It wasn't hope exactly, she was too worn for hope. But it was possibility, and that was more than she'd had in months. Thomas closed the door behind them, shutting out the cold and the town and all the eyes that watched. And for the first time since Anna was born, Violet stood inside walls that didn't feel like a cage. The parlor smelled like beeswax and wood smoke. Violet stood just inside the doorway, taking in the space with a careful eye, the stone fireplace with its blackened grate, the two ladder-back chairs positioned near the hearth, the small table beneath the window where light fell in clean squares across the floor. Everything was spare but solid, built to last rather than impress. A grandfather clock ticked in the corner, its brass pendulum catching afternoon sun. Thomas moved through the room with the ease of someone who knew every board and beam. "Kitchen's through here," he said, leading her past a narrow staircase. "Not fancy, but it works." The kitchen held a cast-iron stove, a hand pump over a deep basin, shelves lined with mismatched dishes and tin cups. A table with 4 chairs sat beneath a window that overlooked the backyard where chickens scratched in a wire pen. On the counter, a loaf of bread sat wrapped in cloth next to a crock of butter. "I'm not much of a cook," Thomas admitted. "Mostly beans and bacon. Sometimes I trade work for meals at the boarding house." He glanced at her. "But if you know how, the kitchen's yours to manage however suits you." Violet shifted Anna to her other arm. "I can cook. Used to help in a railroad camp kitchen before." She let the sentence die. Before wasn't a place either of them needed to visit right now. Good. He moved to the stove, opened the firebox to check the coals. "Upstairs there's 3 bedrooms. The big one at the front was mine and Sarah's, my late wife. Haven't changed much in there. You and the baby can take it. I'll move my things to the back room." "You don't have to." "I do." He closed the firebox, straightened. "You're giving up everything you know to make this work. Least I can do is give you the better room." He gestured toward the stairs. "Go look, see if it'll suit." Violet climbed the narrow stairs, each step creaking beneath her weight. The upper hallway was dim, lit only by a small window at the far end. 3 doors, all closed. She opened the first. The room took her breath, not because it was grand, it wasn't, but because it was clean and whole and filled with light from 2 tall windows. A brass bed stood against one wall, covered with a quilt in shades of blue and cream, a dresser with a tilting mirror, a rocking chair in the corner, a braided rug on the floor, and in the corner near the window, a wooden cradle, small and perfect, its rockers worn smooth from use. She crossed to it, ran her fingers along the curved edge. "Did you?" "Made it for Sarah when we thought." Thomas had followed her up, stood now in the doorway. "We never got to use it. Baby came too early. Neither of them made it through the night." His voice stayed level, but she heard the old grief beneath it. "Been sitting empty ever since. Seems right for it to finally hold a child." Violet lifted Anna, placed her gently in the cradle. The baby fit perfectly, her small weight settling into the curved bottom like she'd always belonged there. She blinked up at the ceiling, tracking patterns of light, completely unaware that her entire world had just shifted on its axis. "It's beautiful," Violet whispered. "It's yours now. Both of you." Thomas cleared his throat. "I'll let you settle. Reverend Mitchell said he'd meet us at the church at 4. That gives you a couple hours to rest if you need." After he left, Violet sat in the rocking chair and let herself cry. Not from fear this time, but from the strange, overwhelming weight of being given something she hadn't earned and didn't know how to accept. The room smelled like lavender and cedar. The afternoon light fell warm across the floor. Anna slept in the cradle, safe and fed and wanted, and for the first time in 3 months, Violet wasn't bracing for the next disaster. The wedding took 11 minutes. Reverend Mitchell was a lean man with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers who asked no questions when Thomas explained they needed a quiet ceremony with minimal fuss. His wife Ruth served as witness, along with Samuel Chen, who ran the general store and who Thomas had apparently trusted with the truth of the arrangement. They stood in the small chapel while November wind rattled the windows. Violet wore her grey wool dress. Thomas had changed into a clean white shirt and dark vest. Anna slept through the entire ceremony, bundled in Ruth's arms. The words were simple, worn smooth by repetition. "Do you take this woman? Do you take this man?" "I do. I do." The ring Thomas slipped onto her finger was plain silver, slightly too large, but it caught the light through the stained glass window and threw small rainbows across her knuckles. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Mitchell said, closing his Bible. "Thomas, you may kiss your bride." There was a pause, awkward and hanging. Thomas met Violet's eyes with a question in his. She gave the smallest nod. He leaned in, pressed his lips to her forehead, brief, chaste, the kind of kiss you'd give a sister. When he stepped back, his ears were red. "Congratulations," Ruth said, handing Anna back to Violet. "You'll come for supper tomorrow night. Both of you. I won't take no for an answer." In the church registry, Violet watched Thomas write their names in careful script. Thomas Garrett and Violet Brennan Garrett. In the space for witnesses, Ruth and Samuel signed their names. In the space for the child's legitimacy, Thomas wrote without hesitation, "Anna Garrett, daughter of Thomas and Violet Garrett, born the 18th of October, 1889. Just like that, her daughter had a father's name. Just like that, they were safe. Walking back to the house, their house, now Violet felt the weight of the ring on her finger. Thomas walked beside her, not touching, hands in his pockets against the cold. They passed Mrs. Krantz's house. The curtain twitched. Thomas noticed but said nothing, just kept walking steady until they were through the front door and the town was shut outside where it belonged. The first days passed in careful negotiation, two strangers learning to share space without collision. Thomas rose before dawn, dressed in the back room, went downstairs to make coffee. Violet woke to the smell of it, to Anna's morning hunger, to the strange reality of a house that held warmth without demanding payment. She'd nurse the baby in the rocking chair while light crept across the floor, then carry her downstairs to find Thomas already gone to the forge, a plate of bread and butter left on the table, the stove stoked and burning steady. She learned his rhythms. He worked until noon, came home for a quick meal, returned until dusk. He washed at the pump behind the house before coming inside, scrubbing the soot from his hands and face, changing his shirt. At supper they sat across from each other, eating in silence, broken only by the clink of forks, and Anna's occasional babbling from the cradle. Thomas had moved downstairs near the stove. "Stew's good," he'd say. "Thank you. Need anything from town tomorrow?" "Flour, if you're going." "I'll bring some." The conversations were careful, polite, empty of anything that might require real revelation. They were performing marriage, she thought, playing house like children. But the children didn't know what was at stake. Children didn't understand that one wrong move could shatter the fragile protection they'd built. On the third day, Ruth Mitchell appeared at the door with a basket of apples and barely concealed curiosity. "Thought you might like some fresh fruit," she said, peering past Violet into the house. "And I wanted to see how you're settling." Violet invited her in because refusing would have been suspicious. Ruth sat at the kitchen table, accepted tea, held Anna with practiced ease, while Violet cut the apples into neat slices. "It's lovely to see this house lived in again," Ruth said. "Thomas has been alone too long. We'd worried about him. He seems—" Violet searched for a safe word. "Content. He's a good man. Private, but good. Salt of the earth, as they say." Ruth bounced Anna gently. "And this little one is precious. How old did you say?" 3 months. And where did you meet Thomas? Forgive my asking, but it all happened so quick. People are curious." There it was, the question beneath all questions. Violet had prepared for this, rehearsed the story with Thomas the night before. "I was passing through. Got stranded when the stage broke down outside town. Thomas helped me with repairs. We got to talking, realized we suited each other. Sometimes things happen fast when they're meant to." It was thin as paper, but Ruth nodded like she wanted to believe it. "Well, you're lucky to have found each other. Not many men would take on a woman with a child." "I know," Violet said quietly. And she did know. She knew exactly how rare this was, how unlikely, how close she'd come to losing everything. Ruth stayed another hour, chatting about the church ladies' sewing circle, about the winter coming hard and early, about the new family who'd moved in above the telegraph office. When she finally left, Violet closed the door and leaned against it, exhausted. Being respectable was harder than being honest. It required constant vigilance, constant performance. That night at supper she told Thomas about the visit. He nodded, chewing slowly. "They'll all come sniffing around for a few weeks. Just keep the story simple. We met, we married, that's all they need to know. And when they ask about Anna's father, you tell them I'm her father. That's the truth now, legal and recorded." He met her eyes. "Anyone says something different, they're calling me a liar. And people in this town know I don't lie." The weight of that settled over her, the realization that he was willing to stake his reputation on her story, on her child, on a marriage that existed only on paper but had to appear real as stone. She learned other things, too, in those early days. She learned that Thomas read in the evenings thick books about engineering and metallurgy that he borrowed from the Reverend's small library. That he was teaching himself to read Spanish from a grammar book because half his customers were Mexican ranch hands who felt more comfortable in their own language. That he'd fought in the war Union side and still walked with a slight limp on cold mornings from a bullet that had shattered his knee at Shiloh. She learned he was kind to his horse, patient with his tools, and absolutely methodical about everything from how he stacked firewood to how he organized the pantry shelves. He needed order, she realized. It was how he made sense of a world that had taken his wife and child and left him alone in a house too big for one person. And slowly, carefully, she began to add her own rhythms to his. She baked bread on Tuesdays and Fridays. She planted herbs in small pots on the kitchen windowsill, rosemary, thyme, sage, using seeds Ruth had given her. She mended his shirts, patched the worn elbows, and replaced missing buttons. She swept the floors, washed the windows, made the house smell like something other than solitude. Anna grew and changed. She smiled now, real, deliberate smiles that lit her whole face. She reached for things, Clara's nose, Violet's hair, the spoon beside her plate. She made sounds that almost resembled words, babbling conversations with herself that made Thomas smile despite himself. One evening, Violet came downstairs after putting Anna to bed and found Thomas sitting in the parlor with a small wooden toy in his hands. A horse, carved and sanded smooth, with careful detail in the mane and tail. "Made it at the forge," he said, not looking up. "Thought she might like something to hold besides that old doll." Violet took it, felt the smoothness of the wood, the care in every curve. "It's beautiful. It's simple." "No," she said. "It's beautiful because you made it for her." He glanced at her then, something unguarded in his expression. "She's a good baby. Easy. You've done well with her. I've tried. It shows." The moments stretched between them, fragile and new. Then Anna cried from upstairs, and Violet went to her, leaving Thomas alone with his books. But something had shifted. Some wall had developed a crack, letting light through. The town remained suspicious, but wary. At the general store, women whispered when Violet entered, but didn't confront her directly. Samuel Chen served her with quiet efficiency, never mentioning what he'd witnessed at the chapel. When she passed men on the street, they tipped their hats to Thomas's wife, not to the saloon girl. The distinction was everything. Only Mrs. Krantz remained openly hostile. She stopped Violet outside the post office one afternoon, her face set in righteous disapproval. "A quick marriage doesn't erase what you are," she said, voice low but vicious. "Everyone knows that baby isn't his. Everyone knows what you did to trap him." Violet felt the old shame rise hot in her throat, but before she could respond, Thomas appeared beside her. He must have seen them from the forge across the street. "Mrs. Krantz," he said, his voice level but cold as January. "You got something to say about my wife and daughter, you say it to me." The older woman's mouth opened, closed. You were merely spreading lies. That's between you and your conscience. But you won't do it where my family can hear." He took Violet's elbow gently. "We're done here." They walked away, leaving Mrs. Krantz speechless on the sidewalk. Violet's hands shook with suppressed fury and relief. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." Thomas didn't slow his pace. "She needed to understand how this works. You're under my protection now. Anyone who wants to hurt you has to go through me first. And I'm a lot bigger than Prudence Krantz." That night, after supper, Violet washed dishes while Thomas dried. It was becoming their routine, wordless cooperation, hands passing plates in the lamplight. "Why do you keep doing this?" she asked suddenly. "Being kind, defending me, giving us everything." Thomas set down the plate he'd been drying. "You want the honest answer?" "Yes." "Because when Sarah died, the women in this town brought casseroles and pity, but none of them stayed. None of them sat with me through the nights when the house felt too empty. They did their Christian duty and left me alone with it." He picked up another plate. "I know what it's like to need someone and have nobody answer. So, when I saw you standing in the road with that baby, looking like the world had used you up and spit you out, I thought, here's someone who needs answering. And I could do it. So I did." Violet scrubbed at a stubborn spot of dried gravy, her throat tight. "I don't know how to repay you." "You don't repay kindness. You just pass it forward when you can." She looked at him, this strange, solid man who'd reshaped her entire life in less than a week. "I'm glad it was you," she said, "in the road that day. I'm glad it was you who stopped. Thomas's mouth curved in something almost like a smile. Me too. Outside, November wind rattled the shutters. Inside, the lamp burned steady, casting warm light across the kitchen, where two people who'd been strangers 9 days ago were slowly learning to be something else. Not quite family yet, not quite friends, but something new and undefined that was growing between them like a seedling pushing through late winter snow, fragile, persistent, reaching toward light. Winter arrived with vengeance, burying Copper Bend under 3 feet of snow by Christmas. The world contracted to the space between the house and the forge, narrow paths carved through white drifts that came up to Violet's knees. She learned to move through cold that bit through wool and leather, learned to bank fires so they'd burn through the night, learned the particular silence that came with snow-muffled mornings when even the chickens stayed quiet in their coop. Anna turned 6 months old in April when the thaw finally came. She could sit up now without toppling, could grasp objects and bring them deliberately to her mouth, could recognize Thomas's footsteps on the porch and turn her head toward the sound. She'd grown plump on Violet's milk and the mashed vegetables Violet had learned to prepare, her cheeks round and healthy, her dark hair coming in thick enough to curl behind her ears. One morning in late spring, Violet woke to find Thomas already in the kitchen, but instead of preparing to leave for the forge, he stood at the stove frying eggs and bacon. The smell pulled her downstairs faster than usual. Anna balanced on her hip. "You're cooking," she said, surprised. "Trying to." He flipped an egg with more force than necessary and watched it slide across the pan. "Thought maybe you'd like a morning off? You've been up 3 times a night with her teething." Violet had thought he slept through Anna's fussing. His room was at the back of the house, separated by the hallway and 2 closed doors. "You heard that?" Hard not to. He scooped the eggs onto plates, added bacon and bread. "Sit. Eat while it's hot. I'll watch her." He took Anna with an ease that had developed over months of small interactions, bouncing her while Violet kneaded bread, holding her while Violet hung laundry, walking her around the kitchen when she was fussy and Violet's arms ached. Now he settled her on his knee, let her grab at his beard while he cut his food one-handed. Violet ate slowly, savoring both the meal and the strangeness of being served in her own kitchen. "You didn't have to do this." "I know. Wanted to." He winced as Anna's small fingers found his ear. "Besides, figure it's only fair. You do everything around here, cooking, cleaning, mending. I just hammer metal and pretend I'm useful. You're plenty useful, maybe." He shifted Anna to his other knee. "Been thinking, though. You mentioned once you worked in a railroad camp kitchen. You ever think about cooking for money again?" Violet set down her fork. "What do you mean?" "Boarding house is looking for someone to help with meals. Mrs. Fletcher's getting too old to manage alone. I told her I might know someone interested. Pays decent. $3 a week, plus you could bring Anna with you. Mrs. Fletcher's got grandchildren. She knows how to work around a baby. $3 a week." Violet's mind raced, calculating. That was money of her own, earned by her hands and her skill. Money that wasn't borrowed or given or traded for things she didn't want to think about. "You told her about me?" "Told her I had a wife who could cook better than anyone in the territory and who might be willing to help out. Nothing else." "She doesn't need to know anything else." Violet studied his face, looking for the catch. "Why would you want me working? Most men want their wives home." Thomas met her eyes steadily. "Because I see you reading my engineering books when you think I'm not looking. Because you pace the parlor when Anna sleeps like you're looking for something to do with all that thinking. Because I married you to give you freedom, not to make you another kind of prisoner." He paused. "But it's your choice. You want to stay home with Anna, that's fine too. I just thought you should know the option existed." She thought about the boarding house, about other people's kitchens and conversations, about being more than just Thomas Garrett's mysterious wife. About having her own money, her own purpose beyond these 4 walls. "I'd like to try," she said quietly. "If you really meant it, I wouldn't have said it otherwise." The next week, Violet walked to the boarding house with Anna strapped to her back in a carrier. Thomas had fashioned from canvas and leather. Mrs. Fletcher was a stout woman with silver hair and flour permanently under her fingernails. She took one look at Violet, then at Anna, and said, "Can you make biscuits that don't taste like chalk?" "Yes, ma'am." "Can you stretch a chicken to feed 8 men who eat like they've never seen food before?" "I can." "Then you'll do. Start tomorrow. 6 in the morning." The work was hard, standing over hot stoves, feeding men who shoveled food without tasting it, washing dishes until her hands cracked and bled. But it was honest work, and the men didn't look at her the way they had at the Silver Dollar. They looked at her like she was someone's wife, someone's mother, someone who belonged in a kitchen rather than a bedroom. She learned their names: Frank and Joseph, who worked the lumber mill; Samuel, who drove freight wagons; Old Pete, who prospected in the hills and came to town once a month smelling like whiskey and loneliness. They were careful around her, respectful in a way that felt new and strange. They asked about Anna, commented on how she'd grown, brought her small gifts: a carved spoon from Frank, a rag doll from Samuel's wife. At home, things shifted in ways both subtle and profound. Thomas started teaching her the names of tools, showing her how the forge worked, explaining the properties of different metals. She'd stand in the doorway of the workshop on slow afternoons, Anna playing with wood scraps on a blanket, watching him shape iron into horseshoes, hinges, door latches. His hands moved with absolute certainty, creating order from raw material. "You ever think about making something besides practical things?" she asked one day. He looked up from the piece he was working. "Like what?" "I don't know. Something beautiful just for the sake of it." Thomas considered this, hammer resting on his thigh. Beauty and practicality aren't opposites. A good hinge is beautiful if it's made right. A horseshoe that fits proper and lasts, that's beautiful too. Just a different kind than what hangs in museums. "But you could make art if you wanted. I've seen the horse you carved for Anna. You've got the skill." "Maybe." He returned to his work, but she saw him glance at the scrap pile in the corner, at the twisted pieces of metal waiting for purpose. "Maybe sometime." The next week, he brought home a wind chime made from various lengths of iron pipe, each one tuned to a different note. He hung it from the porch, Eve without comment, but when the wind caught it and sent music rippling through the evening air, Violet saw him smile. Summer brought heat that turned the forge into an oven and made Anna cranky and flushed. Violet learned to soak cloths in cool water, to keep the curtains drawn during the hottest hours, to make lemonade from the lemons Samuel Chen sold at the general store. She and Thomas fell into a rhythm of sitting on the porch after supper, watching the sun set, while Anna crawled between them, exploring the worn boards with intense concentration. They talked more now. Not the careful, polite exchanges of those first weeks, but real conversation. About books they'd read, places they'd been, the shape of clouds moving across the darkening sky. Thomas told her about growing up in Pennsylvania, about learning the trade from his father, about the war and the things he'd seen that still visited him in dreams. Violet told him about Ohio, about her mother's garden and her father's anger, about the long road west and the choices that had led her to that room above the Silver Dollar. "You ever regret it?" he asked one evening. "Any of it?" She looked at Anna, now asleep in her lap, thumb tucked in her mouth. "If I regretted the path, I'd have to regret her, and I can't. She's the only thing I ever did that mattered." Thomas nodded slowly. "That's how I feel about Sarah. The grief is terrible, but I can't regret loving her just because losing her broke something in me." "Does it get easier? The broken parts?" "No, but you learn to work around them. Like a bad joint that aches in cold weather, you just adjust. They sat in comfortable silence, the wind chime singing its metal song, fireflies beginning their slow dance above the darkened grass. After a while, Thomas said, "You know, when I asked you to marry me, I thought I was doing you a favor, rescuing the damsel, playing hero. But I was wrong." Violet looked at him, surprised. "Wrong how? You weren't helpless. You were fighting with everything you had. You just needed someone to even the odds." He met her eyes. "And the truth is, I needed rescuing too. I just didn't know it until you and Anna moved in, and this house remembered how to be alive." Something in Violet's chest loosened, a knot she hadn't known she was carrying. "We rescued each other then." "Yeah," Thomas said softly. "I think maybe we did." In August, Ruth Mitchell convinced Violet to join the church ladies' sewing circle. Violet resisted at first, remembering Mrs. Krantz and the petition, remembering how these women had judged her. But Ruth persisted, and finally Thomas said, "Might do you good. Get out, talk to people who aren't me or boarding house lodgers." So Violet went, carrying Anna and a basket of mending, expecting coldness and quiet condemnation. Instead, she found something more complicated, women who were curious but trying to be kind, who asked careful questions and shared neighborhood gossip and showed her how to do a particular stitch she'd never mastered. Mrs. Krantz wasn't there. Ruth mentioned later that she'd been asked to stay away after the incident outside the post office. The ladies agreed that Christian charity includes not tormenting young mothers, Ruth said diplomatically. Even if some of us have opinions about how those mothers came to be, Violet learned to navigate the social terrain, to deflect personal questions with vague answers, to laugh at the right moments, to contribute, enough that she wasn't invisible, but not so much that she drew dangerous attention. She learned that Ellen Porter's husband drank, that Sarah Chen was expecting her fourth child, that the schoolteacher Miss Hartwell was being courted by the new banker, and everyone had opinions about whether it was a good match. She contributed too. When Sarah Chen admitted she was struggling with the pregnancy, Violet brought her the ginger tea recipe that had helped during her own morning sickness. When Ellen Porter showed up with a black eye poorly covered by powder, Violet didn't ask questions, but quietly pressed a jar of salve into her hand and whispered, "There's room at our house if you ever need it." Ellen stared at her, shocked, then said, "You do that? After how this town treated you?" "Especially after how this town treated me," Violet replied. "I remember what it's like to have nowhere safe to go." The story spread. Within a week, 3 different women had found excuses to visit the house on Birch Street, to meet this woman who'd married the blacksmith so suddenly and who apparently understood things respectable wives weren't supposed to know about. They brought small gifts, preserves, fabric scraps, a packet of seeds, and left reassured that whatever Violet Garrett's past contained, her present was steady and her future seemed kind. Thomas noticed the increase in visitors. "You're becoming popular," he observed one evening, watching yet another woman leave the porch with a wave. "I'm becoming trusted," Violet corrected. "It's different. Is that what you want?" She considered this, bouncing Anna on her knee. "I don't know what I want, besides keeping her safe and fed. But having people look at me like I'm a person instead of a problem, that's something I didn't know I needed until I had it." In September, Anna took her first steps, 3 wobbling paces from the sofa to Thomas's outstretched hands, before she sat down hard on her padded bottom, looking surprised and delighted. Thomas scooped her up, laughing, and Violet felt her eyes sting with sudden tears at the sight of this man who wasn't Anna's father by blood, but who loved her with the fierce, steady devotion of someone who'd chosen her deliberately. "Did you see that?" Thomas called to Violet, who was peeling potatoes at the kitchen table. She walked 3 whole steps. Violet abandoned the potatoes, came to the parlor where Thomas was setting Anna down again, encouraging her to try once more. "Come on, little bird. Show your mama what you can do." Anna looked at him, looked at Violet, and launched herself forward with more confidence than sense. 5 steps this time, before she tumbled. Violet caught her, lifted her high, and Anna shrieked with laughter, pure joy at her own accomplishment. That night, after Anna was asleep, Thomas knocked softly on Violet's bedroom door. "Can I come in? Just for a minute?" She opened the door in her nightgown and wrapper. He stood in the hallway, still, fully dressed, holding something in his hands. "I made this," he said, offering it to her. "Thought maybe you'd want it." It was a small iron nameplate, beautifully crafted with raised letters that read, "Anna Garrett." Below, in smaller script, "Born the 18th of October, 1889. For her bedroom door," Thomas explained. "So she knows this is her home, her real home, not temporary, not borrowed. Hers." Violet took it, felt the weight of iron and intention. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick. "For this, for all of it, for giving her what I couldn't give her alone. You gave her everything that matters," Thomas said. "I just added a name and a roof. The important parts were always yours." He left then, returning to his room at the back of the house, but Violet stood for a long time, holding the nameplate, understanding that something fundamental had changed. This wasn't a performance anymore, wasn't a legal arrangement to satisfy the town's judgment. This was family real, chosen, built deliberately by people who'd found each other in crisis and decided to build something better than survival. She mounted the nameplate on Anna's door the next morning. Thomas helped, holding it steady while she marked where the screws should go. When it was done, they stood back and admired it together, this small declaration of permanence, this promise that Anna Garrett belonged here, name on the door like armor against anyone who might question it. "Perfect," Thomas said. Then, after a pause, "Violet, I've been thinking." "About what?" "About what we tell Anna when she's old enough to ask questions." Violet's stomach tightened. "What do you think we should tell her?" "The truth. That I'm not her blood father, but I'm her father by choice, and choice counts more than blood ever could." He looked at her seriously. "I don't want her growing up with lies, but I also don't want her hurt by the truth that's nobody's business but ours. So we tell her the truth, but we tell her it's private. Something like that. When she's old enough to understand nuance. Until then," he shrugged, "I'm just her papa, and you're her mama, and we're a family. Simple as that." Violet nodded, relieved. "I can live with that." "Good." Thomas smiled, touched the nameplate gently. "Because I plan on being her papa for a long time. Might as well make sure she knows it." The autumn passed in gold and copper, leaves falling like benediction across the yard. Violet's confidence grew with each passing week in the boarding-house kitchen, where Mrs. Fletcher now let her plan menus and train new help. In the sewing circle, where her opinions were sought and valued. In her own home, where she moved with the assurance of someone who finally understood she wouldn't be cast out for making mistakes, Thomas changed too. He smiled more, laughed at Anna's antics, joined Violet on the porch even when he was tired, like her company was worth more than sleep. He'd started taking on apprentice work, teaching young men the trade, the way his father had taught him. Violet would hear him in the forge, patient and clear as he explained the properties of heat and metal, never impatient when someone made mistakes, always willing to demonstrate again. "You're good at that," she told him one evening. "Teaching. It's satisfying. Passing on what you know. Making sure it doesn't die with you." He paused, watching Anna stack blocks on the floor. "Been thinking I might expand the business. Hire permanent help. Maybe take on bigger contracts, architectural metalwork for the new buildings going up in Helena. That sounds ambitious." "It is, but I've got reason to be ambitious now. Got a family to provide for, a daughter who'll need schooling and clothes, and eventually a dowry." He grinned. Might as well aim high. Violet thought about the man she'd met that cold morning outside the forge, solitary, closed off, existing more than living. And she thought about this version of Thomas, making plans and dreaming out loud, his future suddenly populated with people who needed him to succeed. "I think you can do it," she said. "I think you can do anything you set your mind to." "We," he corrected. "I think we can do it. You're part of this too, Violet. Every decision, every plan. This isn't my house and my life that you're living in. It's ours." The words settled between them like a promise renewed. Ours. Not mine and yours, keeping careful separate accounts. Just ours. Shared. Mingled. Inseparable. That night, Violet wrote in the journal she'd started keeping, recording Anna's milestones and daily observations. But tonight she added something different. "I came here broken, convinced I was nothing but what the world had made me." But Thomas saw something else. He saw a person worth standing beside. And slowly, day by day, I'm learning to see it too. Not forgiveness exactly, I'm not sure I deserve that, but possibility. The chance to be more than my worst moments. The chance to build something good from bad foundations. That's more than I ever dared hope for. That's everything. She closed the journal, listened to the house settling around her, Thomas moving in his room, Anna breathing softly in her cradle, the wind chime singing its metal song outside. And for the first time in her life, Violet felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The stranger arrived on a Tuesday in late October, riding a bay mare with a silver tack that caught afternoon light like water. He stopped first at the hotel, took a room, asked questions in a cultured and Eastern voice that marked him as someone from beyond the territories. By Wednesday morning, everyone in Copper Bend knew a well-dressed gentleman was making inquiries about a woman who'd worked at the Silver Dollar Saloon approximately 2 years prior. Violet heard about it from Mrs. Fletcher, who'd heard it from the hotel cook, who'd heard it directly from the man himself. "Says he's looking for someone specific." Mrs. Fletcher reported while Violet kneaded bread dough. Anna, playing with wooden spoons at her feet, described her down to the color of her hair. "Says he has urgent business to discuss." Violet's hands stilled in the dough. Did he give a name? His or hers? "His name's Richard Thornhill from Boston." Didn't mention her name, but Mrs. Fletcher lowered her voice, though they were alone in the kitchen. "Violet, he described you. Everyone knows it. You need to tell Thomas before this man finds your house." But it was already too late for that. Thomas came home at noon, his face carved from stone. He closed the door carefully behind him, removed his hat, hung it on its peg with deliberate precision. "There's a man in town," he said. "Says his name is Thornhill." Violet stood at the stove, wooden spoon gripped like a weapon. "I know. He's asking about you. About a woman who worked at the Silver Dollar in the winter of '88. Thomas crossed the kitchen, stopped at the table, gripped the back of a chair. "Violet, is he Anna's father?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Anna, sensing tension, had stopped playing, and now watched them both with wide, serious eyes. Violet set down the spoon, wiped her hands on her apron, and forced herself to meet Thomas's gaze. "I don't know. Maybe. It was one night. I never knew his real name. He said he was a merchant from Denver passing through." Her voice cracked. "I didn't know there would be consequences. I thought I'd been careful." Thomas's jaw worked. He wasn't angry, she realized. He was calculating, the way he did with difficult metalwork that required absolute precision. "What does he want?" "I don't know. I didn't even know he was looking for me. Then we find out, together." He straightened, pulled on his coat. "I'll bring him here. Better to face this in our home, on our terms, than to let him control the conversation. Thomas, you're my wife. Anna's my daughter. Those are legal facts, recorded and witnessed. Whatever he wants, he goes through me first." His eyes softened slightly. "I won't let him take her, Violet. Or hurt you. That's a promise." He left before she could respond. Violet sank into a chair, pulled Anna into her lap, and tried to stop, shaking. The child wrapped her small arms around Violet's neck, patted her face with sticky hands. "Mama," Anna said, clearly one of her few reliable words. "Mama! Yes, baby, I'm here. I'm right here. But for how much longer?" If this man was truly Anna's biological father, if he had proof, if he wanted custody, the law favored fathers, especially wealthy, educated fathers, over women like her. The marriage to Thomas might not be enough. It might all come apart like wet paper, everything they'd built, dissolving under scrutiny. They couldn't survive. They arrived within the hour. Violet heard their boots on the porch, Thomas's solid tread, and a lighter step behind. She stood, smoothed her dress, positioned herself between the door and Anna, who sat on the floor surrounded by her toys. Thomas entered first, his face neutral. Behind him came a man in his mid-30s, clean-shaven, wearing a suit that probably cost more than everything Violet owned. He had dark hair graying at the temples, sharp features, intelligent eyes that swept the room and landed on Anna with an intensity that made Violet's stomach drop. "Mr. Thornhill," Thomas said formally, "this is my wife, Violet Garrett. Violet, this is Richard Thornhill from Boston." Thornhill removed his hat, nodded politely. "Mrs. Garrett, thank you for seeing me. I apologize for the intrusion, but I have a matter of some urgency to discuss." His voice was educated, careful, completely at odds with the rough voices she'd grown accustomed to in Copper Bend. It brought back memories of that night 2 years ago, a man in the Silver Dollar who'd spoken differently than the miners and ranch hands, who'd paid in crisp bills instead of coins, who'd been almost apologetic about what he wanted. "Say what you came to say," Thomas said, not offering chairs or hospitality. Thornhill glanced at Anna again, and Violet saw something in his face, recognition perhaps, or confirmation of a suspicion. "2 years ago, I passed through Montana Territory on business. I spent one night in Copper Bend, at the Silver Dollar Saloon. I met a woman there named Violet. He paused, choosing words carefully. We spent time together. I left the next morning, continued to Denver, never expecting to return. But 3 months ago, I received a letter." He reached into his coat pocket, withdrew an envelope, yellowed and travel-worn. It came from a woman named Delilah Vasquez. She said she'd worked at the Silver Dollar with someone named Violet, that Violet had a child in October of '89, and that I should know about it because of the timing. He stopped, looked at Anna again. "Mrs. Garrett, is that child mine?" Violet's breath caught. Delilah. She'd written to him, sent this man looking for her after all this time. Why? Out of concern? Mischief? Some misguided belief that he deserved to know? Why would Delilah write to you? How did she even know your name? I don't know. The letter was unsigned, except for her first name. It took me months to track it back to Montana, to find people who remembered her, to piece together that you'd moved from the saloon to... He gestured around the modest kitchen. Here, with a husband and a child who's approximately the right age. Thomas stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between Thornhill and his family. What do you want, Thornhill? You came all this way for a reason. Thornhill's composure cracked slightly. I want to know if I have a daughter. I want... He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking less polished, more human. I have a wife in Boston. We've been married 8 years. We've lost 3 children, all stillborn or dead within days. The doctors say she can't carry to term. That will never have living children. His voice roughened. So when I got that letter, when it said there might be a child, my child, alive and well somewhere in the territories, I had to know. I had to see. Violet felt terrible sympathy, even as fear gripped her throat. This man wasn't a villain. He was desperate, grieving, searching for something to fill a void she understood all too well. But his grief didn't give him rights to her daughter. Anna is my child, she said clearly. Mine and Thomas's. She has a father. Not legally, Thornhill said quietly. I inquired about the birth record. There was no father listed initially. A later addition after your marriage. But if I'm the biological father and Mrs. Garrett, look at her. Look at her eyes, her features. You know there's a resemblance. Violet looked at Anna, at her dark hair and serious eyes, at the shape of her face. She'd always told herself Anna looked like her own mother, like her side of the family. But now, seeing Thornhill standing there, she couldn't deny certain similarities, the arch of the eyebrows, the set of the chin. The truth she'd been avoiding settled over her like cold water. That doesn't matter, Thomas said flatly. Biology isn't fatherhood. I've raised that child, provided for her, loved her. She knows me as her father. You're a stranger who shares some features. I understand your position, Mr. Garrett, and I respect what you've done for them, but I have rights too, legal rights. And I have resources, money for her education, for her future, opportunities you can't provide in this frontier town. Thornhill's voice gained urgency. I'm not trying to hurt anyone. I just want to know my daughter, to be part of her life. Is that so unreasonable? Yes, Thomas said. When it means disrupting the only family she's ever known. Thornhill's expression hardened. Then perhaps we should let the courts decide who has the stronger claim. I can prove I was here at the right time. I can demonstrate means to provide. And I can show that Mrs. Garrett's past, forgive me, but it's relevant. Her past calls into question her fitness as a sole guardian. The threat was clear, politely delivered but unmistakable. Take this to court, and Violet's history would become public record. Her time at the Silver Dollar examined and judged. The convenient timing of her marriage questioned. Anna's legitimacy debated by lawyers and strangers. Everything they'd built, exposed, and potentially destroyed. Get out, Thomas said, his voice deadly quiet. Get out of my house. Thornhill backed toward the door, replaced his hat. I'll give you 3 days to consider your position. After that, I'll consult with Judge Farley about my options. I'm staying at the hotel if you wish to discuss this reasonably. He paused at the threshold. For what it's worth, Mrs. Garrett, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the position this puts you in. But I can't walk away from my child. Not when I've already lost so many. The 70s... Door closed behind him. Silence filled the kitchen, thick and suffocating. Anna, sensing catastrophe even if she couldn't understand it, began to cry. Violet scooped her up, held her close, felt the child's heart beating against her own like a frantic bird. He can't take her, Violet whispered. Thomas, he can't, he won't. Thomas crossed to them, wrapped his arms around them both. I won't let him, but Violet, we need to think, we need to plan. He's right about one thing, if this goes to court, your past will come up. The town might turn against us. Judge Farley might decide a wealthy, educated man from Boston provides better opportunities than a frontier blacksmith. I don't care about opportunities. I care about her being loved by people who've been there since her first breath. I know, but courts care about money and respectability. He pulled back, looked at her seriously. We need a lawyer, someone who can argue our case better than we can, and we need to move fast before Thornhill files anything official. The next 3 days passed in a blur of frantic activity. Thomas rode to Helena, consulted with a lawyer named Abraham Steele, who handled mining disputes and territorial rights cases. Steele was expensive, more money than they had readily available, but he agreed to take the case for half his usual fee after hearing the circumstances. You've got advantages, Steele told them during his visit to Copper Bend. The marriage is legal, the child's been in your care for over a year, and Mr. Thornhill abandoned his rights by leaving and making no attempt to claim paternity until now. But he's got money, education, and the biological connection. It'll be close. Meanwhile, the town's reaction split down predictable lines. Ruth Mitchell and the women from the sewing circle rallied around Violet, prepared to testify to her character as a mother and wife. But others, particularly those who'd never fully accepted her, whispered that maybe the child would be better off with her real father, with opportunities and education they couldn't provide out here in the territories. Mrs. Krantz, unsurprisingly, saw the situation as divine justice. She stopped Violet outside the general store, her face triumphant. "God has a way of revealing truth," she said loudly enough for others to hear. "You can't build a life on lies and expect it to stand. That child belongs with her real father, not with a woman who sold herself and a man foolish enough to claim another's mistake." Violet felt Thomas tense beside her, but before he could respond, Ellen Porter stepped forward. "That's enough, Prudence. We all know your idea of Christian charity begins and ends with judgment. Violet Garrett is a good mother and a good woman, and this town is lucky to have her." Other women murmured agreement, not all of them, but enough. Enough to remind Violet that she'd built something here, earned trust and friendship through consistent kindness and hard work, that she wasn't the isolated, desperate girl who'd stood in the road outside the forge 2 years ago. But support from the community wasn't enough to change the law. On the third day, Thornhill filed a formal petition with Judge Farley, claiming paternity and requesting custody arrangements. The hearing was set for the following week. That night, Violet couldn't sleep. She stood at Anna's door, watching her daughter sleep in the cradle Thomas had built, the nameplate on the door gleaming in lamplight. Anna Garrett. The name that had given her identity, protection, belonging. Would she lose even that? Would she become Anna Thornhill, property of a man who'd shared nothing but biology and now wanted to claim ownership? Thomas found her there, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Whatever happens, we fight. You understand that? Even if Farley rules against us, we appeal. We take it higher. We don't stop until we've exhausted every option. And if we lose everything, if they take her away, then we'll follow. I'll close the forge, sell the house, move to Boston if we have to, stay close enough that she knows we didn't abandon her, that we're still her family, even if the law says otherwise." His voice was fierce, certain. "I meant those vows, Violet, for better or worse. This is worse, and I'm still here." She turned into his arms, let herself be held, drew strength from his solidity. They stood that way for a long time, two people who'd found each other in crisis, and now faced the possibility of losing everything they'd built together. In the morning, Thornhill appeared at their door again, but this time his expression was troubled rather than confident. "I need to speak with you both," he said. "Something's happened. May I come in?" Thomas let him in reluctantly. Thornhill sat at the kitchen table, turned his hat in his hands. "I received a telegram yesterday from Boston. From my wife. She's—" He paused, struggling with emotion. "She's left me. Says she can't bear being married to a man who's chasing after a child with another woman while their own babies are buried in the ground. Says I've become obsessed, that I'm destroying our marriage for a fantasy." Violet felt an unwilling stab of sympathy. "I'm sorry. I've been thinking about what you said, about biology not being fatherhood, about Anna knowing you as her parents." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "I watched you in town yesterday, saw how you are with her, how she reaches for you when she's frightened, how she laughs at Mr. Garrett's silly faces. And I thought, what am I doing? What right do I have to destroy that just because I'm desperate for something I lost?" "Are you withdrawing the petition?" Thomas asked carefully. "I don't know. I came here looking for a daughter, but maybe what I really needed was to see that she exists, that she's alive and loved and happy, that somewhere in the world a child who might be mine is thriving." He stood, moved to the window. "I can't just walk away. But maybe there's a middle ground. Maybe I don't need custody. Maybe I just need," he turned back to them, "permission to know her, to visit occasionally, to send letters and gifts, to be part of her life without destroying the family she already has." Violet exchanged a look with Thomas. It wasn't what they wanted. They wanted Thornhill gone, the threat erased completely. But it was better than a court battle that could tear Anna from their arms. "We'd need it in writing," Thomas said slowly. "Legal documents that protect our custody, that make clear we're her parents, and you're what? A family friend? A benefactor? Whatever you want to call it. Whatever keeps her with you while giving me the chance to know she's real, that she's well, that I didn't just walk away and forget." Thornhill's voice broke. "I've lost so much already. I can't bear to lose this too, even if I never really had it to begin with." The hearing 3 days later was brief. Abraham Steele presented the agreement they'd drafted Thornhill, acknowledging Thomas and Violet Garrett as Anna's legal parents, while reserving the right to maintain limited contact as a family friend and benefactor. Judge Farley reviewed the documents, questioned both parties to ensure no coercion, and finally approved the arrangement with clear stipulations protecting the Garretts' custody. "This is highly unusual," Farley said, peering over his spectacles. "But given the circumstances, and given that all parties seem to agree this serves the child's best interests, I'll allow it. Mr. and Mrs. Garrett, the child remains yours legally and completely. Mr. Thornhill, you may maintain the contact outlined in these documents, but any attempt to exceed those boundaries will result in immediate legal consequences." Walking out of the courthouse, Violet felt dizzy with relief and lingering fear. They'd won, but only partially. Thornhill would still be part of their lives, a reminder of the past that could never be fully escaped. As if reading her thoughts, Thomas squeezed her hand. "It's not perfect," he said quietly, "but it's enough. She stays with us. That's what matters." That evening, Thornhill came to say goodbye before returning to Boston. He brought gifts, a silver rattle, a book of children's stories, a banknote for $500 made out in Anna's name. "For her education," he explained, "when she's older. And I'll send more each year, if you'll allow it." He asked to hold her, just once. Violet hesitated, then nodded. Thornhill took Anna carefully, awkwardly, like holding porcelain. The child studied his face with serious curiosity, reached out to touch his nose. He smiled, tears tracking down his face. "Hello, Anna," he whispered. "I'm very glad you exist. I'm very glad you're loved." After he left, Violet and Thomas stood on the porch, watching his horse disappear down the road toward town. "Do you think he'll really come back?" Violet asked. "Maybe. Maybe not. People make promises when emotions are high." Thomas turned to her. "But if he does, we'll handle it. Together. Just like we handled this." Violet leaned against him, exhausted but grateful. The crisis had passed, the threat neutralized if not eliminated. Anna was still theirs, their family still intact. But something had changed. They'd been tested, pushed to the edge, forced to declare exactly what they were to each other. And they'd chosen to fight as one unit, not as a man protecting his property, but as partners defending what they'd built together. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not giving up on us. For not deciding this was too much trouble." Thomas kissed the top of her head. "Violet, you and Anna are the best trouble I ever signed up for. I wouldn't trade it for all the peace in the world." The week after the hearing, something unexpected happened. The whispers that had followed Violet through town for 2 years shifted from speculation to grudging respect. Women who'd crossed the street to avoid her now nodded in acknowledgement. Men who'd looked through her like glass now tipped their hats to Mrs. Garrett, the blacksmith's wife who'd stood her ground against a wealthy Easterner and won. But the real change came 3 days after Thornhill's departure, when Violet walked into the general store and found Mrs. Krantz holding court near the fabric bolts, her voice carrying across the room. Of course the judge sided with them, she was saying to two younger women who looked uncomfortable. Money talks in this territory just like everywhere else. Thomas Garrett paid that lawyer from Helena, probably paid the judge too. It's shameful, allowing a woman of her character. That's enough. The words came out of Violet's mouth before she'd consciously decided to speak. She crossed the store, stood directly in front of Mrs. Krantz, felt her heart hammering but kept her voice steady. You've been talking about my character since I arrived in this town. You've questioned my fitness as a mother, spread lies about my marriage, and done everything in your power to make me feel like I don't belong here. And I'm done being quiet about it. The store had gone silent. Samuel Chen paused mid-transaction, his hand frozen over the cash register. 3 other customers turned to watch. Mrs. Krantz's face flushed red. How dare you speak to me in that tone? No, how dare you? Violet took a step closer. You call yourself a Christian woman, but I've seen more compassion from the miners who drink at the saloon than I've ever seen from you. You signed a petition to take my daughter away not because you cared about her welfare, but because you wanted to punish me for choices you've decided make me unworthy of love. You worked in a saloon. Mrs. Krantz hissed. You had a child out of wedlock. I did, and I'm not ashamed anymore. I did what I had to do to survive, and I'd do it again if it meant keeping my daughter fed and safe. Violet's voice rang clear through the store. But you know what I haven't done. I haven't torn other women down to make myself feel righteous. I haven't used God as an excuse for cruelty. I haven't stood in judgment of people's worst days while ignoring their best ones. One of the younger women near Mrs. Krantz, Ellen Porter, whose black eye Violet had quietly treated months ago, spoke up softly. She's right, Prudence. Violet's been nothing but kind to everyone in this town. She helped me when I needed it, and never asked for anything in return. That's more Christian than most of what gets preached on Sunday. Mrs. Krantz's mouth opened and closed like a fish. This is, I won't stand here and be lectured by a woman who, then leave, Samuel Chen said from behind the counter. His quiet voice somehow carried more weight than shouting, Mrs. Garrett is a valued customer and a good neighbor. You want to spread poison about her, you can do it somewhere other than my store. Mrs. Krantz stared at him, shocked. Then she grabbed her basket and swept toward the door, her skirts rustling with indignation. At the threshold, she turned back. This town has lost its moral compass. You'll all regret siding with her. I doubt that. Ellen Porter said clearly. After Mrs. Krantz left, the store exhaled. Samuel came around the counter, his expression apologetic. Should have done that months ago. I'm sorry you had to be the one to finally stand up to her. Violet's hands were shaking with residual adrenaline. I didn't plan to. It just happened. Best things usually do. He patted her shoulder awkwardly. Now, what did you come in for? And whatever it is, there's a 10% discount on it. Consider it a celebration of finding your voice. That evening, when Violet told Thomas what had happened, he set down his fork and just looked at her for a long moment. You really told Prudence Krantz off in front of half the town? I did. A slow smile spread across his face. I wish I'd been there to see it. That woman's been terrorizing this town for 15 years. You probably did everyone a favor. I was terrified the whole time. My voice was shaking. Brave isn't the absence of fear, it's doing the thing even when you're scared, senseless. He reached across the table, covered her hand with his. I'm proud of you. The warmth in his voice made something flutter in Violet's chest. Over the past 2 years, she'd grown accustomed to Thomas's steady presence, his reliability, his quiet kindness. But this was different. This was admiration, maybe even something deeper. She looked at their joined hands, his scarred and calloused from forge work, hers marked with small burns from cooking. Working hands, honest hands, hands that had built something real together. Thomas, she said carefully, can I ask you something? Always. Are you happy? With this arrangement? With how things turned out? Or do you ever wish you'd stayed alone, kept your life simple? He considered this, turning her hand over in his. studying her palm like it contained answers to questions he'd been afraid to ask. I was alone for 9 years after Sarah died. People thought I was content, maybe even preferred it that way. But content isn't the same as happy. It's just empty without the sharp edges. He met her eyes. You and Anna, you brought the sharp edges back. The worry, the fear, the stakes that make everything matter. But you also brought laughter, purpose, someone to share supper with. Someone who makes coffee exactly the way I like it without me ever having to ask. You notice that? I notice everything about you. The words hung in the air between them, heavier than casual observation. The way you hum when you're kneading bread. How you always check on Anna 3 times before you can fall asleep. The fact that you read my engineering books and then reorganize them by subject instead of height, because it makes more sense that way. He smiled. You've changed everything about my life, Violet, and I wouldn't go back to before for anything. Violet felt tears prick her eyes. I was so scared when we married. Scared you'd regret it, scared I'd disappoint you, scared that one day you'd look at me and remember what I was and decide I wasn't worth the trouble. You were never in trouble. You were the answer to a question I hadn't figured out how to ask yet. Thomas stood, came around the table, pulled her gently to her feet. And for the record, I know exactly what you were. You were a survivor doing what you had to do. That's nothing to be ashamed of. That's everything to admire. He pulled her into an embrace, and Violet let herself lean into his chest, breathing in the familiar smell of coal smoke and soap. They'd shared this house for 2 years, but had maintained careful boundaries, separate rooms, respectful distance, the polite choreography of a marriage that was legal, but not quite real. But standing here now, wrapped in his arms, Violet realized the boundaries had been slowly dissolving without either of them acknowledging it. The careful distance had narrowed to something else entirely. "Thomas," she whispered against his shirt, "I think I might be falling in love with you." She felt him go still, then heard his quiet laugh of relief. "Thank God. Because I've been in love with you for months and had no idea how to say it without scaring you away." She pulled back to look at his face. "Months? Probably since you stood up to that drunk who tried to start a fight in front of Anna last spring. You grabbed a broom and chased him down the street in your nightgown, shouting that some of us were trying to raise decent children and he could take his profanity elsewhere." His eyes crinkled with amusement. "That's when I knew. This wasn't just an arrangement anymore. This was my wife, fierce and brave and completely magnificent." Violet laughed, then cried, then kissed him a real kiss, not the chaste forehead press from their wedding or the brief pecks in front of witnesses. This was want and recognition and 2 years of careful restraint finally breaking into something honest. Thomas kissed her back with a gentleness that made her ache, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Anna called from upstairs where they'd put her to bed. "Papa! Mama!" They looked at each other and laughed. "Timing," Thomas said ruefully. "I'll go," Violet offered, but he caught her hand. "Wait, before we go back to being parents, I need to ask, do you want to really be married? Not just legally, but actually? Because if you do, if you want to share more than just a house and a name, I'm God, I'm very interested in that possibility." Violet thought about the room she'd occupied alone for 2 years, about the careful boundaries they'd maintained, about all the walls she'd built to protect herself from being hurt again. And she thought about Thomas offering her coffee every morning, about the way he danced with Anna in the kitchen, about how safe she felt wrapped in his arms. "Yes," she said simply. "I want that." "Good." He kissed her again, quick and decisive. "Then we'll figure out the details. But first," Anna called again more insistently, "parental duty calls." The transformation of their relationship from partnership to genuine marriage happened gradually over the following weeks. Thomas moved his things from the back room into Violet's their bedroom. They learned new rhythms, new intimacies, the thousand small adjustments that came with truly sharing a life instead of just cohabiting. Violet had been nervous at first, her experiences at the Silver Dollar having taught her that physical intimacy was transactional, often unpleasant, something to be endured rather than enjoyed. But Thomas was patient, tender, treating her like someone precious rather than purchased. He taught her that intimacy could be different when built on trust and affection, rather than necessity and coin. One morning in early December, Thomas woke her with coffee and an unusual request. "I want to marry you again." Violet pushed herself up on one elbow, confused. "We're already married." "Legally, yes. But that ceremony was rushed, practical, nothing to do with love. I want to do it again, properly this time. With our friends there, with Anna old enough to understand what's happening. A real wedding that celebrates what we actually are to each other, not what we needed to be to satisfy the law." Violet considered this, touched by the romance of it. "A renewal of vows?" "Exactly. What do you say? Will you marry me again, Violet Garrett, this time for love instead of survival?" She kissed him, tasting coffee and morning, and the certainty of yes. "I'd be honored." They planned it for Christmas Eve, a small ceremony at the church followed by a celebration at the house. Ruth Mitchell helped organize, recruiting the sewing circle women to prepare food and decorate the church with pine boughs and candles. Thomas commissioned a new dress for Violet from the seamstress, deep blue wool with pearl buttons, practical enough for everyday wear, but beautiful enough for a wedding. The night before the ceremony, Violet sat at the kitchen table writing in her journal, while Thomas played with Anna in the parlor, her delighted giggles punctuating the evening quiet. She wrote, "Tomorrow I marry Thomas again. The first time, I barely knew him. I was desperate, cornered, willing to promise anything to keep my daughter safe. I stood beside him in that chapel and felt nothing but fear and fragile hope. Now I know the weight of his hand in mine. I know how he laughs, what makes him angry, the nightmares that wake him sometimes at 3 in the morning. I know he takes his coffee black, reads engineering texts like poetry, and cries when he thinks no one can see him missing Sarah. I know he's not perfect, he's stubborn, forgets to eat when he's focused on work, and snores like a saw hitting a nail. But he's mine, and I'm his. And this time when I say the vows, I'll mean every word, not just with hope, but with certainty." Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold, the kind of Montana winter day where the sky looked close enough to touch. The church was filled with neighbors and friends, the sewing circle ladies, the boarding house regulars, miners and ranch hands who'd gotten to know Thomas through his work, Samuel Chen and his wife, Mrs. Fletcher. Even some of the working girls from the Silver Dollar who'd heard about the ceremony and came to support one of their own who'd made it out, made it good. Violet wore her blue dress, her hair pinned up with small white flowers Ruth had somehow found in December. Anna, now 2 years old, wore a white pinafore and carried a basket of pine cones tied with red ribbon. Thomas stood at the altar in his best suit, looking nervous and hopeful and more handsome than she'd ever seen him. Reverend Mitchell smiled at the assembled crowd. "We're here for something rare and beautiful. The renewal of vows between two people who've discovered that a marriage begun in practicality has transformed into one built on love." Thomas and Violet came to this altar 2 years ago as near strangers, making promises they hoped they could keep. Today they return as partners, parents, friends and lovers to make those same promises with full knowledge of what they mean. Thomas took Violet's hands, his voice steady and sure. 2 years ago, I offered you protection and a name. Today, I offer you my heart, which you've had for longer than I admitted. I promise to stand with you through whatever comes. I promise to be Anna's father not just legally but in every way that matters. I promise to love you not despite your past, but because of everything you've overcome to be standing here. You make me better than I am alone. You make me want to build a future worth living. I love you, Violet. Today, tomorrow, always. Violet's, the voice shook but held. Thomas, you saved my life. I don't mean that poetically, I mean you literally saved me and my daughter from a future too dark to think about. You gave us safety when we had none, dignity when the world told us we deserved shame. You taught me that kindness isn't transactional, that love can be chosen, that family is built through daily choices rather than blood. I promise to be your partner in all things, to support your dreams and challenge you when you're being stubborn, to raise Anna together as the father and mother she deserves. I love you with everything I am, everything I was, and everything I'm becoming. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for choosing me. They exchanged new rings, simple gold bands that Thomas had forged himself, inscribed inside with their names and the date. Reverend Mitchell pronounced them husband and wife, again and always, and when Thomas kissed her, the church erupted in applause. At the house afterward, people crowded into every room, eating Ruth's roasted chicken and Violet's bread, drinking cider, laughing and telling stories. Anna ran through the forest of legs, playing with other children, being passed from lap to lap by women who'd watched her grow from the infant in her mother's desperate arms to this sturdy, happy toddler who knew nothing but love and security. Ellen Porter pulled Violet aside at one point, pressed a small wrapped package into her hands. "From all of us at the sewing circle. Open it later." Inside, Violet found a sampler, beautifully stitched with a quote that made her eyes burn. She stood in the storm, and when the wind did not blow her way, she adjusted her sails. Below it, signed in small, neat letters, "To Violet Garrett, who taught us all about courage. With love from your friends." As evening fell, and guests began to leave, calling Merry Christmases and congratulations, Thomas found Violet in the kitchen, where she'd retreated for a moment of quiet. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, rested his chin on her shoulder. "Happy? Overwhelmingly so. Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life. That, I get to keep it. You earned every bit of it, every single moment of peace and joy you fought for that." Anna appeared in the doorway, dragging her blanket, her eyes heavy with sleep. "Papa bed," Thomas scooped her up. "Come on, little bird. Let's get you settled." He looked at Violet. "You coming?" "In a minute. I just want to look at all this." She gestured at the disordered kitchen, the half-empty platters, the cups and plates waiting to be washed, all the evidence of people who'd come to celebrate them, who'd accepted them, who'd become family by choice rather than obligation. After Thomas carried Anna upstairs, Violet stood alone in the kitchen of the house that had once seemed like an impossible dream. She thought about the girl she'd been 2 years ago, desperate, defeated, standing on a frozen road with her daughter in her arms and nowhere left to run. That girl would never have believed this future was possible. Would never have imagined standing in her own kitchen in a house full of love, married to a man who chose her deliberately and completely, surrounded by friends who knew her story and embraced her anyway. She heard Thomas coming back downstairs, his footsteps familiar and comforting. He appeared in the doorway, leaned against the frame with that small smile she'd grown to love. "Penny for your thoughts. Just thinking about beginnings and endings. About how sometimes what looks like the end of everything is actually just the beginning of something you never knew to hope for." Thomas crossed to her, pulled her close. "Poetic. Also true." He kissed her forehead. "Now come to bed, Mrs. Garrett. We've got the rest of our lives to philosophize, and I'd rather start that tomorrow." After some sleep, Violet let him lead her upstairs, past Anna's room, where the nameplate still hung. Anna Garrett, born October 18, 1889, passed the room that had once been hers alone and was now theirs together. She changed into her nightgown, climbed into bed beside her husband, and felt the weight of 2 years of careful construction settle into permanent foundation. "Thomas?" she whispered in the dark. Thank you for stopping that day, for seeing us on the road and deciding we were worth saving." His arm tightened around her. "Violet, you saved yourself. I just gave you the tools to do it. Don't ever forget that when it mattered most, you're the one who stood up and fought. First for Anna, then against Thornhill, then against Mrs. Krantz and everyone else who tried to tell you that you didn't deserve this life. That was all you. We saved each other," she said firmly. "That's the truth of it. We saved each other. Then, I guess we're even." Outside, Christmas bells began to ring from the church, marking midnight, marking the beginning of something new. Inside, in the house on Birch Street, two people who'd found each other in crisis held on tight, knowing that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Not because the law said so, not because survival demanded it, but because they'd chosen each other deliberately and completely. And in the small room down the hall, Anna Garrett slept peacefully. Held safe in the architecture of love, her parents had built brick by careful brick, promise by kept promise, day by faithful day. She'd never remember the road where her mother had stood abandoned, never know the terror of those early months. She'd only know the warmth of this house, the security of two parents who adored her, the certainty that she was wanted and treasured and home. That was the gift they'd given her. That was the victory that mattered most. Spring came to Copper Bend in 1895, with sudden violent snowmelt flooding the creek, turning roads to rivers of mud, stripping away winter's silence and replacing it with the cacophony of renewal. Violet stood in the doorway of what had once been a run-down boarding house at the edge of town, surveying the renovations with a practiced eye. New shutters painted forest green, fresh whitewash on the clapboard, a sign above the door, hand-lettered by Thomas in elegant script, "Haven House. Mama, can I show Emma my room now?" Anna called from the porch. At 7 years old, she was all legs and opinions, her dark hair braided down her back, her face a perfect blend of Violet's determination and something else, something that might have been Thornhill's sharp intelligence, though Violet had long ago stopped trying to parse out genetic inheritance from simple personality. "Let me check the rooms first. Make sure everything's safe," Violet replied. She turned to the woman beside her, a tired-looking girl barely 20 with a swollen belly and haunted eyes. "What do you think, Martha? Will this work for you?" Martha clutched her small bundle of possessions tighter. "You're really letting me stay? Free? Room, board, and help finding work once the baby comes. That's what Haven House does." Violet touched her arm gently. "You're the third woman we've taken in this month. There's no shame here, no judgment, just safety and time to figure out what comes next." She'd opened Haven House 6 months ago, funded partly by her savings from the boarding house work and partly by an anonymous donation that had arrived in a thick envelope with a Boston postmark. Thornhill kept his distance as promised, but twice a year money arrived with a brief note. "For Anna's future, and for whatever good you see fit to do." Violet had debated keeping it, pride warring with practicality. In the end, practicality won. If Thornhill wanted to fund second chances for women like she'd been, who was she to refuse? The house had 4 bedrooms upstairs, a large kitchen, a parlour that doubled as a common room. She'd furnished it simply but comfortably, beds with clean linens, a table large enough for communal meals, shelves lined with books and supplies for children. In the 6 months since opening, they'd housed 9 women. 3 had moved on to jobs in other towns, 1 had reconciled with family, 2 were still living upstairs while working at local businesses Violet had convinced to hire them. 1 had left in the night, unable to accept help after years of refusing it. Violet tried not to think about that one too much. Thomas appeared around the corner carrying lumber for the new chicken coop they were building in the backyard. At 49 he'd gone completely grey, the silver beard making him look distinguished rather than old. The forge business had expanded significantly. He now employed 3 men full-time and had contracts throughout the territory. But he still made time to help with Haven House, building and repairing and using his reputation to shield Violet's project from those who thought giving charity to fallen women was encouraging sin. "Coop frames up," he announced. "Should have finished by tomorrow. Then Martha can start with the chickens. Learn the routine." Learning the routine was code for what Haven House really offered, not just shelter, but skills, purpose, the 1,000 small pieces of self-sufficiency that turned victims into survivors. Violet taught cooking and basic arithmetic. Ruth Mitchell ran a sewing circle twice weekly. Samuel Chen's wife offered Mandarin lessons, surprisingly practical given how many Chinese immigrants were settling the territory. Each woman left with more than she'd arrived with, even if she left with nothing else. Anna had taken to the mission with the fierce enthusiasm of childhood. She helped the younger children, read stories to the women who couldn't read themselves, and asked pointed questions about why people needed help in the first place. "Why don't they just go home?" she'd asked, when the first woman arrived, confused by the concept of home being the thing you fled from. Violet had sat her down, chosen her words carefully. Sometimes home isn't safe. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protecting from. And sometimes you make choices or have choices forced on you that mean you can't go back to who you were before. Like you couldn't go back? Anna had asked with the directness of children who've heard their own story often enough to reference it casually. Like me, yes. But Papa saved you. Papa gave me a chance to save myself. There's a difference. Anna had considered this, then nodded with the seriousness of someone much older. "So we're giving other people chances to save themselves?" "Exactly." Now Anna dragged Martha's daughter Emma, a shy 4-year-old who hadn't spoken since arriving 3 days ago, into the house to explore. Violet watched them go, saw Emma's small hand tucked trustingly in Anna's bigger one, and felt that particular ache of witnessing healing happen in real time. "You're thinking too hard again," Thomas observed, coming to stand beside her. "I can see the wheels turning, just thinking about exponential impact. We help Anna, she helps Emma, Emma grows up and helps someone else. It spreads like ripples. Philosophy before breakfast, you're in a mood." But he was smiling. "Come on. I need coffee, and you need to eat something before you collapse. Ruth's bringing more donations by at noon, and you know she'll stay for hours asking detailed questions about everything." The house on Birch Street had expanded along with their family. 2 more children now: Daniel, age 4, with Thomas's steady temperament, and baby Sarah, named for Thomas's first wife and blessed with Violet's red-gold hair. The house rang with noise and life, nothing like the careful quiet of those early days. Violet had learned to cook for 7, to manage chaos, to function on interrupted sleep and stolen moments of peace. She'd also learned to delegate. Mrs. Fletcher had finally retired from the boarding house, and Violet had taken over management completely, hiring 2 other women to handle daily cooking while she planned menus and handled accounts. Between that income and Thomas's expanded forge business, they were solidly middle class, now not wealthy, but comfortable enough to fund Haven House and still save for the children's futures. The town had changed too. Copper Bend was growing, attracting families and businesses drawn by the railroad that now ran through twice daily. With growth came new attitudes, new people who didn't know or care about Violet's past. She was simply Mrs. Garrett, the blacksmith's wife who ran the boarding house and that charitable project for unfortunate women. Some still disapproved. There would always be people who thought helping the desperate was enabling sin, but they were outnumbered now by those who saw Haven House as evidence of Christian charity in action. At breakfast, with Daniel spilling milk and baby Sarah gumming bread in her high chair, and Anna recounting every detail of Haven House's latest arrival, Thomas caught Violet's eye across the table and winked. This was their life, now messy, loud, full to bursting. Nothing like the desperate quiet of that first year when they'd moved around each other like strangers, learning a careful dance. After breakfast, Violet walked to the general store for supplies. Samuel Chen greeted her with the familiarity of old friendship. "Mrs. Garrett, here for the usual. Plus extra flour and sugar. We've got 3 women at Haven House now, and babies eat more than you'd think. That Martha girl settling in? Getting there. She's scared still, jumps at loud noises. But she's trying." Samuel measured out flour, his movements practiced and efficient. "You know, my wife's sister just arrived from San Francisco. Widow, 3 children, no money. I was going to offer her our back room, but would Haven House take a family?" "I know you usually work with single women," Violet considered. The house was designed for individuals, but one of the upstairs rooms was large enough for a family if needed. "How old are the children?" 6, 8, and 10. Old enough to help out, contribute to the household. "Send her by tomorrow. We'll make it work." This was how Haven House filled word of mouth. Quiet referrals. Women and families sent by people who knew someone who needed help and remembered that Violet Garrett understood what it meant to have nowhere else to turn. She'd helped 17 families so far. Some stayed weeks, others months. A few had struggled with the structure and rules. No drinking, no men upstairs, mandatory contribution to household work, and left for the familiar chaos of their previous lives. But most thrived under the careful combination of safety, expectation, and genuine care. The challenges were constant. Money was always tight, despite donations and fundraising. Space was limited. Some women arrived with trauma so deep that Violet's amateur attempts at comfort fell woefully short. She'd learned to recognize when someone needed more than she could provide, and she'd established connections with the Sisters of Mercy in Helena for cases requiring long-term professional care. It wasn't perfect. She couldn't save everyone, but she could offer a hand up to those ready to grab it, and sometimes that was enough. One afternoon in late May, Violet sat on Haven House's porch with Martha, teaching her basic bookkeeping. "You're good with numbers," Violet observed, as Martha quickly calculated sums that would have taken Violet twice as long. "Used to help my father with his accounts before—" Martha stopped, the sentence hanging unfinished. "Before. It was always complicated. There's a position opening at the freight office. Clerk work, basic accounting. I could recommend it to you if you're interested." Martha's head snapped up. "Really? They'd hire someone like me? Someone like you who's good with numbers and reliable? Why wouldn't they?" Violet met her eyes steadily. "Martha, your past doesn't define your future unless you let it. I know that's easy to say and hard to believe, but it's true. I'm proof. But you married Mr. Garrett. You had someone to stand up for you. I had someone who gave me a chance. That's what I'm giving you. The rest is up to you." Martha got the job. 2 months later, she moved into her own small apartment above the Mercantile, taking Emma and a donated set of dishes and the knowledge that she could support herself through her own skill. She cried when she left, thanking Violet so profusely that Violet had to physically stop her and say firmly, "You did this." I just held the door open. But privately, watching Martha walk down the street with her daughter's hand in hers and her head held high, Violet cried too. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile, the tangible proof that helping worked, that people could rebuild, that second chances weren't fantasy, but achievable reality. In August, Anna started school. Violet walked her there the first day, watching her daughter join the cluster of children in the schoolyard with easy confidence. Anna had never been abandoned, never been told she was unwanted, never experienced the particular cruelty of knowing you were inconvenient. She'd grown up secure in love, and it showed in every fearless interaction, every ready laugh, every assumption that the world was fundamentally safe. That was the gift Violet and Thomas had given her, not material comfort, though they provided that, but the deeper security of being absolutely certain she belonged. And watching Anna wave goodbye and run toward the schoolhouse, Violet understood viscerally what she was trying to give the women at Haven House, not just shelter, but the foundation for their children to grow up with that same security. The cycle could end. Trauma didn't have to be inherited. Thomas found her standing there long after the schoolyard had emptied, staring at the building with tears on her cheeks. "Sentimental?" he teased gently. "Grateful," she corrected. "Grateful that she gets to be a child, that she never has to know what it's like to be unwanted. She knows her story, though. About Thornhill, about you and me, about how we started. Knowing your history isn't the same as being defined by it." Violet turned to him. "She knows she was loved enough that we fought for her. That's what matters." They walked home, hand in hand, a simple gesture that still made Violet marvel sometimes. That she could walk through town touching her husband in daylight, that no one looked at her with contempt or pity, that she was simply another wife and mother going about her day. The ordinariness of it was extraordinary. That evening, while Thomas bathed the younger children and Anna practiced her letters at the kitchen table, Violet sat down to write letters. She'd been corresponding with women in other towns who'd heard about Haven House and wanted to start similar projects. She shared what worked, the balance of structure and compassion, the importance of teaching skills alongside providing shelter, the necessity of community support. She also shared what didn't work, being too permissive, trying to force healing, expecting gratitude. One letter was from a woman in Butte who'd written, "How do you handle people who say you're enabling sin, who claim that helping women in these situations just encourages immoral behavior?" Violet responded, "I tell them that punishment and abandonment don't create virtue, they just create desperation. And desperate people make desperate choices. If we want women to choose better, we have to give them actual options. Haven House isn't about condoning past choices, it's about making sure those choices don't become life sentences." She sealed the letters, addressed them carefully. This work was spreading beyond Copper Bend now. 3 other towns in Montana Territory had opened similar houses. A woman in Denver was lobbying her city council for funding to start one there. What had begun as Violet's personal mission to help a few desperate women was becoming a movement, and the weight of that responsibility both thrilled and terrified her. In October, on Anna's 8th birthday, they threw a party at the house. 20 children came, running through the yard, playing elaborate games Anna had organized with military precision. Violet watched from the porch with the other mothers, discussing school policies and winter preparations, and whose cow had gotten loose and destroyed whose garden. Ruth Mitchell sat beside her, knitting something small and blue. "Another baby?" Violet asked. "For my daughter. She's expecting in January." Ruth smiled. "You know, when Thomas first told me about your marriage, I thought it was the strangest thing I'd ever heard, a practical arrangement to save a child from being taken. I couldn't imagine it working long-term." "Neither could I," Violet admitted, "but you've built something remarkable. Not just your marriage, but Haven House, this community of women helping women. You've changed this town, Violet. Made it kinder." "That's no small thing." Violet watched Anna directing younger children with cheerful authority, saw Thomas emerge from the house carrying the birthday cake she'd spent all morning decorating, observed the casual ease with which neighbors' children played in her yard like they belonged there. "I just did what I wished someone had done for me," she said quietly. "That's all. That's everything," Ruth corrected. "That's how the world gets better, one person deciding to give what they needed and didn't get." As winter approached and Haven House prepared for its busiest season, cold weather always brought more desperate people. Seeking shelter, Violet found herself increasingly drawn to expansion. The house was at capacity, and she was turning away women weekly. She began researching property, looking at buildings that might be converted, calculating costs and fundraising possibilities. "You're planning something," Thomas observed one evening, watching her pore over papers spread across the kitchen table. "There's an old hotel building near the railroad station. Owner wants to sell. It's got 12 rooms, a kitchen big enough for commercial use, space for everything Haven House does, but bigger. That's ambitious." "I know." She looked up at him. "Too ambitious? Are we overreaching?" Thomas sat down across from her, studied the numbers she'd written. 5 years ago, you thought asking for a second room at Haven House was overreaching. Now you're running a successful operation that's helped dozens of families. I think your instincts about what's possible have proven pretty reliable. But this would cost," she gestured at the figures, "more than we can manage alone. So we find partners, other donors. The church might contribute. Business owners who see the value in helping people become self-sufficient workers." He covered her hand with his. "If you want to do this, we'll find a way. We always do." The hotel purchase took 6 months to arrange fundraising, negotiations, rallying community support. Some opposed it, arguing that Copper Bend didn't need a larger facility for that sort of woman. But enough people remembered Violet's own transformation, or had witnessed the success stories coming from Haven House, that support outweighed objections. In April of 1896, the new Haven House opened with space for 30 residents, expanded facilities, and Violet as full-time director. She hired help 2 women to manage daily operations, another for cooking, a part-time teacher who offered evening classes in reading and arithmetic. Haven House became an institution, referenced in territorial newspapers as an example of effective private charity. Delegations from other towns visited to study their methods. And every woman who passed through carried the knowledge that survival was possible, that transformation could happen, that the world occasionally offered second chances to those brave enough to reach for them. On a quiet evening in June, Violet stood on the front steps of the new Haven House, watching sunset paint the sky in shades of copper and gold. Inside, women prepared supper together, children did homework at long tables, babies slept in donated cradles. The building hummed with life and purpose, with the particular energy of people rebuilding from ruins. Thomas came to stand beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their town settle into the evening. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't stopped that day?" he asked eventually. "Sometimes, usually late at night when I can't sleep." Violet leaned into him. "I think about the versions of my life that didn't happen. Anna, taken away. Me, disappearing into the kind of poverty you don't come back from. All the women I've helped who might have ended up like I nearly did. That's a lot of weight to carry. It's also motivation. Every woman who leaves here with a job and a plan, that's a life that could have gone differently. That's a child who might grow up secure instead of scared. The wait is worth it." They watched Anna run across the yard, with Daniel chasing her, their laughter carrying on the evening air. Sarah slept inside in Ruth's arms, watched over by women. Violet had helped, and who now helped her in return. The circle was complete, the pattern established: receive help, give help, teach others to do the same. "I want to write it down," Violet said suddenly. "Our story. Not for publication, just for Anna and the others, so they know where we came from, what was possible even when everything seemed hopeless." "You should." Thomas kissed her temple. "Though knowing you, it'll turn into some kind of handbook for other women starting similar houses." He knew her well. The story she'd write wouldn't just be memoir, it would be blueprint, encouragement, proof that transformation was achievable. She'd include the hard parts alongside the triumphs, because false promises helped no one. But she'd also emphasize the central truth she'd learned, that people contained more resilience than they knew, that community mattered more than individual virtue, and that extending a hand to someone drowning might save 2 lives instead of 1. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was finally quiet, Violet opened a new journal and wrote, My name is Violet Garrett. Once I was Violet Brennan, standing in a frozen road with my daughter in my arms and no future I could bear to imagine. A man stopped, offered help without knowing my story, and changed the trajectory of two lives, mine and Anna's. Now I spend my days offering that same chance to other women, watching them discover their own strength, witnessing transformation happen one small choice at a time. This is not a story about rescue. It's a story about partnership, about communities choosing to catch people when they fall, about the radical possibility that second chances can become first chances at something better. If you're reading this from a place of desperation, know this: the road doesn't end where you're standing. There are hands reaching toward you, even when you can't see them yet. There are people who will help simply because they remember what it's like to need helping. Your story doesn't have to end in the place it went wrong. Mine didn't. And neither does yours. She signed her name, dated the entry, and sat back, feeling the weight and possibility of legacy settle over her shoulders. This was the work now, not just helping individuals, but creating systems that would outlast her, that would continue offering chances long after she was gone. Haven House would grow, inspire others, become part of the fabric of how communities cared for their most vulnerable. And every woman it helped would carry forward that knowledge, that pattern of extending help to the next person who needed it. Thomas appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of tea. Writing your manifesto? Something like that. He handed her a cup, settled into the chair beside her. You've come a long way from the woman who was afraid to speak up in the general store. We've come a long way, she corrected. I couldn't have done any of this alone. True, but you're the one with the vision, the drive, the inability to see someone suffering without trying to fix it. He smiled. I just build things and look supportive. You do more than that, and you know it. They sat together in the lamplight, drinking tea, watching night deepen beyond the windows. Outside, Copper Bend slept under stars. Inside, 2 people who'd found each other in crisis and built something enduring held the comfortable silence of long partnership. And in rooms throughout town, in the original house on Birch Street, in Haven House, old and new, in apartments where former residents now lived independently, the ripples of their choice to help spread outward in ways they'd never fully see, but could trust were happening. Violet closed the journal, set it aside for tomorrow's work. Tonight was for rest, for gratitude, for the simple peace of being exactly where she belonged. The road that had once seemed to lead nowhere had carried her here to purpose, to love, to a life built deliberately from the ruins of what she'd lost and what she'd survived. And tomorrow, she'd wake up and do it again, offer another hand, open another door, give another woman the chance she'd been given. Because that's what survival meant, not just making it through, but turning around and pulling someone else through behind you. That's what love meant. Not just receiving it, but multiplying it until it covered more ground than one person ever could alone. The work would continue, the circle would widen. And somewhere, in some town she'd never visit, a woman standing in a frozen road with nowhere left to run would find a hand reaching toward her. That woman would take it. And the pattern would repeat, spreading hope like seeds on the wind, growing forests from single planted chances. That was a legacy, that was enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.